I'm Catriona Morten, I'm a sensory-motor psychotherapist, and today I'd like to talk to you about disorganised attachment. Disorganised attachment comes about when we've had experiences of our care being very problematic, very frightening, and really incredibly inconsistent and quite extreme. If our caregivers have been aggressive, violent, really scathing whenever we need anything from them, or if there's been any kind of abuse, whether it's physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, then we have to form an attachment with our carer. It's not a choice. We have to do that. Babies have to attach to the carers, otherwise they don't survive. So we have to find a way of being in close proximity with our carer. We have to find a way of expressing our needs, and we have to find a way of getting our needs met. When we're faced with really difficult, aggressive, dangerous situations, and when we're reliant on dangerous, aggressive, violent people for our survival, then we have to find ways of managing that. Within the disorganised attachment spectrum, there's a lot of different ways of adapting. We've got to adapt, we've got to get coping mechanisms. We've got to know the things to do and the things not to do. They get us punishment. And those things get really hardwired into our system. It's not a choice. It becomes a way of behaving, a way of communicating, and a way of being in a relationship because our life's depended on it. So within a disorganised attachment, we have to be able to form a trauma bond. We have to find a way of being as safe as we can in close proximity. When we live with someone who is highly unpredictable, highly aggressive, highly dangerous, then it's better to keep them close. It's better to keep them in a place that we can read them so that we can know, we can get the best clue about what's coming up. People with disorganised attachment are really tuned in to someone else. They will spot something coming before it even shows up. They'll sense it. They're like super high alert and sensitive because they have to be. They've got to have a radar for guessing what's coming, for reading a person, reading a room, and knowing what best to do. Because in some situations, it's best to absolutely not express any need whatsoever, because that could be used against us. If that was the case, then we learn to completely shut off, cut off from our needs. Don't need anything. Don't need anything from you. I'm completely self-sufficient. Babies learn to not express anything. They'll be very quiet, very silent, very good babies. They can be extremely unresponsive, very flat affect, very difficult to read. So they're not giving anything away. Another feature of disorganised attachment is, and from the outside looking in, it makes no sense. When we have to create this trauma bond, it's a bond, and the need for proximity and to be able to be near the person becomes paramount. Often separation, that you'd think logically, well, that will provide safety, that'll be a really good thing. It creates massive anxiety. Often children in these households, they really don't want to go to school. They'll run away from school, they'll do anything they can because one, they don't know what's going on, they don't know what they're going to be walking into when they come home. That not knowing can feel really dangerous. And so for a trauma bond, instead of moving away and having safety in that, if we then have to go back, then we don't want that distance. We want proximity. It makes it really difficult to leave that relationship. Why do women go back into, and men, back into really violent, hostile relationships? Because they've got a trauma bond. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to survive in this place. Also, this level of disruption and chaos, menace, whatever it was, the kind of toxic soup that we grew up in, because it's so familiar, it's all we know, and we know how to operate in that, the opposite can feel really disconcerting and very unsafe. So those children will create havoc wherever they go. Those adults will create chaos and arguments and disruption wherever they go. And it doesn't make any sense. It's like, well, why would you want to live like that? Because it's all that they know. That level of quiet and calm is very disconcerting, because often in those home situations when things have gone very quiet before the storm, calm before the storm, what's coming next? Don't let your guard down at any opportunity. These people will also often be labelled as really manipulative because they can't express a need because that makes them a target. So they have to find a way of operating to get their needs met kind of under the radar, a way of almost kind of playing the payment so that they can get as safely as possible. So someone with a disorganised attachment is very unlikely to be direct, to really be able to say, oh, when you do that, that really annoys me. They will let that be known through a roundabout means. It'll be very, very difficult for them to openly express a need. And from the outside looking in, it makes no sense. Why didn't you just say? Well, I did. No, you didn't. It's playing out under the radar. Because we don't know what's playing out, it's just a series of coping mechanisms, behaviours that are hardwired into us. It's really, really, really difficult to just change it and do things differently, because out of all of the attachment styles, this one feels the most threatening and the most fearful if things are calm, if we get our needs met. If we get into a relationship with someone with a disorganised attachment, it can feel like we're just kind of turned into chaos all the time. Things can go from 0 to 100 really, really quickly, and we don't quite know what was going on. There's a lot of confusion because the disorganised attachment, it's mostly behaviour and managing situations, way more than it being a kind of thought of what's actually going on. There's no time for that, and it forms so early on that we don't have that kind of narrative to go with it. So it's a very behaviour-driven character strategy. When people are so cut off and shut down, it can feel like anything to do with their body, it's like an absolute total mystery. Those people will probably have a very high pain threshold. They've been used to a lot of pain, but also they don't really have the capacity to connect to the pain, connect to the emotions, because that involves feeling, and that's a luxury that they couldn't afford. And so it's very, very difficult to have a genuine feeling and to express that genuine feeling. People with disorganised attachment really need help to connect to the way that their body is, the way that it feels, before they can actually start to safely have a feeling, knowing that there's not going to be a terrible consequence for that. It takes a lot of repetitive behaviour, but it has to be done in a very mindful way. That I'm setting a new neural pathway, setting a new pattern of being that isn't driven by fear and terror and reaction and counter-reaction. If any of this sounds familiar, if some of the things from your past and you think maybe that would have created a disorganised attachment, then it's really worth just finding out how it plays out, what are the coping mechanisms, what are the behaviours that go with that, so that you can make them much more conscious. Also, if you think that you've been in or you're in a relationship with someone with a disorganised attachment, if this sounds familiar, then we have to be really, really mindful and quite accepting in some ways of how difficult it will be for those people to be direct. That label of manipulative is just an operating system, and just gently giving them an experience of something being direct, and it's okay, but they don't have to do that all the time. And just, learning how these things play out so that it doesn't feel like we're being manipulated against our will, or that things are being made deliberately difficult, or people are playing games with us. And sometimes that might be true, but if we can say, well, maybe that person was never able to be direct. Maybe they always had to get involved in these games and make everything way more complicated than it needed to be. When we can understand there's a good reason for that, then we can be much more accepting and helpful in that process, because again, it's making the unconscious conscious, bringing the present moment experiences into play, because they're not the same as the circumstances that we were in before. So we're not just recreating our attachment systems and creating chaos around us all the time, feeling fearful when we're either away from someone or when we're with them. When we can learn to really, really regulate our nervous system, it's a huge benefit for this attachment style, because whether you're close or you're away, it's a highly anxious place. But you won't necessarily look anxious or feel anxious. It's just a kind of toxic soup within your body that really, really needs to be reset, and just to find a much more healthier way to be in proximity and away from people and know that it's not going to have catastrophic repercussions this time. I hope that can help make sense of something that can seem like a very, very complex issue. And if you've got any questions, then pop them down below. If you found this video helpful, give us a big thumbs up, subscribe below, and I'll look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.